One of the most shocking and mysterious cases in Canada's criminal history remained unsolved for nearly half a century. Despite many people losing hope of ever learning the truth, the victims' parents never stopped fighting for justice. And just recently, thanks to advancements in forensic science and modern technology, this perplexing case was finally cracked. Sharron Prior was born in the winter of 1959 in the picturesque city of Montreal. Her mother, who was born in Great Britain, had immigrated to Canada with her family at a young age and spent her entire life there. It was in Canada that fate brought her together with her future husband, George, who served in the Canadian Army. The young couple fell in love at first sight and soon got married. Shortly after, their firstborn child, Sharon, came into the world. Just a couple of days before the little girl's second birthday, her mother gave birth to two more children, twins named Doreen and Maureen. In 1962, George was transferred to the city of Manitoba for military service, where he moved with his family. Their new home was located in one of the city's older neighborhoods, which was nevertheless considered quite safe and peaceful. Sometime after the move, the couple welcomed another child, a son they named George Jr. Unfortunately, soon after this, problems began to arise in the family, and the tension in the relationship reached a critical point. As a result, in 1965, the couple decided to divorce. George continued his military service and was often away, while his ex-wife and 4 children moved into an apartment in the city of Langley, which they were provided through a special assistance program for military families. It was a quiet and cozy place, ideal for raising children. The woman had no idea that even in such peaceful neighborhoods, true monsters in human form could be lurking. From childhood, Sharon was an incredibly kind, caring, and compassionate girl. She was always ready to help those in need, whether it was a person or a defenseless animal. The girl often picked up stray cats and dogs off the streets, especially those that had suffered from human cruelty or illness. She lovingly cared for them, nursed them back to health, and only then sought new owners for them. Sharon adored animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian in the future. In addition, the girl was passionate about sports and creativity. She attended a hockey club, art classes, and even took needlework lessons. It seemed that a wonderful future full of bright events and accomplishments awaited her. Her mother couldn't be more proud of her eldest daughter, who was growing up to be independent, responsible, and sensible beyond her years. Sharon always tried to avoid bad company and trouble, but unfortunately, even this did not save her from a fatal encounter with true evil. In 1975, life was going on as usual for the Prior family. 16-year-old Sharon, like all teenagers, was facing typical problems and difficulties for her age. She loved trendy music and stylish clothes, which her parents did not always approve of. In addition, the girl had started dating a boy named John, who had been in love with her since the 4th grade. He had finally managed to win Sharon's heart, and the young couple began seeing each other. They often hung out with friends and seemed like the perfect match. Seeing their sincere feelings, the girl's parents supported the relationship. According to Sharon's mother, she and her daughter never had any serious arguments. There was always mutual understanding and respect between them. The girl was surrounded by only good people, but even they could not protect her from the terrible tragedy that shattered the life of the entire family. March 29th, 1975, began like any ordinary day. Sharon woke up and had breakfast while her mother was out shopping for Easter groceries and gifts. Upon returning home, the woman brought the purchases inside, and her eldest daughter helped put them away. This day was supposed to be special for the whole family. The mother's friends were planning to visit with their son Stephen, as well as her boyfriend. Sharon spent most of the day painting Easter eggs and preparing for the holiday. Stephen arrived before the other guests and played with the girl's younger brother. After school, Sharon and Stephen were going to stop by the local sports association, which in addition to sports also did needlework. The girl was supposed to pick up a special jacket there, which was called Leo, named after one of the organization's founders who had died of leukemia. This jacket was a symbol of membership in the association, but it was not simply handed out. To earn such a reward, children had to prove themselves, for example, by selling lottery tickets. Sharon really wanted to deserve this jacket, and managed to sell enough tickets. Therefore, she eagerly and proudly went to the association to collect her prize. But disappointment awaited the girl. There was no jacket in her size available. Saddened, Sharon had to return home empty-handed with Stephen. However, She did not lose her festive mood and decided to pick up the jacket another time. Upon returning, the girl joined her mother and her boyfriend Doug, helping them with the final preparations. When all the guests had gathered, a wonderful holiday dinner took place. Afterward, Sharon and her mom hid painted eggs around the house for the younger children to have fun searching for later. Then the girl asked her mother for permission to go to the local Marina Pizzeria, which was a popular hangout spot for teenagers and was located not far from their home. The woman had already allowed her daughter to go there with friends many times before, so this time was no exception. Sharon went to her room to get ready. Around 6 o'clock in the evening, a neighborhood girl stopped by the Prior's house. She sat with Sharon and chatted while the latter was getting dressed to go out. Our story's heroine borrowed one of her mom's sweaters and put on her favorite suede jacket. At 6:30, the girls left the house. But Sharon went to the pizzeria alone. The neighbor changed her mind about accompanying her. The girls said goodbye and each went their separate way, one home and the other to meet up with friends. A whole group of young people had already gathered at Marina, waiting for Sharon. But for some reason, she did not show up at the appointed time. The teenagers figured the girl had simply decided to take a little walk with her boyfriend John, so they continued their merry feast, unaware that something bad had happened. At this time, John and a few friends were at home watching a hockey match. When the game ended, the boys also headed to the pizzeria, hoping to find Sharon there. But she never came. John was extremely surprised because he hadn't seen his girlfriend since school and had no idea where she could be. Like the others, he thought that after the match, he would definitely find Sharon at Marina. Her absence alarmed everyone present, as it was completely out of character for the always punctual and responsible girl. While Sharon was away from home, her mother put the younger children to bed and spent the evening in front of the TV. The woman began to worry that her daughter had still not returned, even though she should have been home a long time ago. However, she decided not to panic prematurely, assuming the girl had simply lost track of time in the company of friends or with her boyfriend. The mother remained waiting in the living room so as not to miss the moment when Sharon would finally come home. But the hours passed, and the girl was still nowhere to be seen. Around midnight, the woman could no longer contain her fear, as there was still no word from her daughter. It was awkward to call her friends at such a late hour, so the mother had to wait until morning, periodically glancing out the window in the hope of seeing Sharon. At the first light of dawn, the alarmed woman began calling her daughter's acquaintances, hoping to find out where she might be. But neither her girlfriends nor boyfriend John had any idea about the girl's whereabouts. The mother's worst suspicions were confirmed that evening. Sharon had not made it to the pizzeria. The neighbor girl with whom they had left the house together confirmed that she had parted ways with Sharon on the street and had not seen her since. A conversation with Mary, Sharon's closest friend, further heightened the anxiety. From her, the mother learned that after 7 o'clock in the evening, an attack had occurred near the pizzeria on a 23-year-old woman named Cheryl Roy. An unknown man had lunged at her with a knife, but luckily, there were people passing by at that moment. Hearing the victim's screams, they scared off the attacker, and he fled in the direction from which Sharon was supposed to come. According to witnesses, it was a tall, dark-haired man with blue eyes and a mustache. He spoke in a quiet, calm voice and was wearing a ski jacket, blue jeans, and pointed-toe shoes. Hearing these details, Sharon's mother was seized by panic. She realized that the place and time of the attack exactly coincided with the route her daughter usually took. The woman immediately went to the police, but the detectives were in no hurry to jump to premature conclusions. Instead of immediately accusing someone of the crime, they decided to launch a large-scale search operation without delay. Hundreds of concerned citizens who learned about the girl's disappearance joined the search. They were given a photo and description of the 16-year-old schoolgirl and combed every corner in the hope of finding her. The mother appeared on local television to tell the community about what had happened. She begged anyone with any information to report it to the police and help find her daughter. Unfortunately, the search yielded no results. Several days passed, but no leads on Sharon's whereabouts emerged. The mother continued to believe that the girl would return home safe and sound. The police tried to maintain hope in her, although they themselves understood that after the critical 48 hours, the chances of finding the teenager alive were rapidly dwindling. Sharon had no reason to run away from home, no conflicts with her parents, or problems at school. Her boyfriend John was a decent young man, and their relationship was filled with love and understanding. He definitely could not have hurt the girl. And in general, Sharon did not have conflicts with anyone and stayed away from bad company. That is why, at the beginning of the investigation, the police had neither suspects nor leads. Attempts to locate the knife-wielding man seen in the area also proved fruitless. The tense silence dragged on, exhausting the missing girl's mother, who continued to hope for a miracle. On the morning of April 1st, around 6 o'clock, the woman woke up and looked out the window. What she saw seemed extremely suspicious to her. A young man came out of the house of Sharon's friend, crossed the street, and took the newspaper left on the doorstep of their home. Gripped by a bad premonition, the mother called out to him, trying to understand what made the guy get up so early and steal someone else's newspaper. But instead of answering, he only quickened his pace, hurrying to leave. The woman ran out into the street and caught up with the young man. He tried to hold onto the newspaper, but the distraught mother snatched it from his hands. The guy shouted, begging her not to look, but it was too late. On the front page was a photo of a girl's body found in the snow just a few minutes' drive from their home in the suburbs. The woman was shocked not only by this terrible news, but also by the fact that the police had not informed her, even though they should have. She learned the truth much later than her neighbors, who had read the morning papers. The mother tried to convince herself that the deceased was not Sharon, but simply some schoolgirl who resembled her. Finally composing herself, she called the police to dispel the chilling suspicion. The detectives replied that they were not yet certain of the victim's identity and invited the woman to come for identification. She was so horrified that she could not bring herself to do it, so she asked her ex-husband to go in her place. The entire neighborhood was in shock, as the girl in the photo did indeed bear a strong resemblance to the missing Sharon. Moreover, her clothing exactly matched the description the mother had given to the police. The father immediately recognized his daughter in the deceased, leaving no doubt. The 16-year-old schoolgirl was dead. Her body was discovered by a local resident who had learned about the girl's disappearance from the newspapers. When he saw the corpse, he immediately realized that he had found Sharon. The man promptly reported the terrible find and the fact that someone had trespassed on his property. He always kept all the doors locked, but on Tuesday, he noticed that the lock was broken, although there were no signs of a break-in. As if the perpetrator had used his own key, even though only the owner had free access to the house. Going out to the driveway, the man saw a woman's body, naked from the waist down. At the same time, nothing was missing from the house. Jack could not understand why someone had dumped the corpse on his property. The police arrived at the scene and began a murder investigation. Law enforcement officers immediately noted the brutality of the crime. There were numerous traces of beatings, bruises, and hemorrhages on the body. The victim was wearing only a suede jacket and a blue sweater, completely undressed below the waist. Her jeans were found a few meters from the body, and her underwear was hanging in a nearby tree. The mouth was taped with a heavily chewed tape tangled in her hair. The girl was posthumously clutching it in her hand, apparently. She had been trying with her last strength to free herself. Traces in the snow indicated that Sharon had tried to get up, meaning the killer had left her to die while she was still alive. The tortured schoolgirl simply did not have enough strength to save herself. Law enforcement officers also found other physical evidence at the crime scene. About 50 feet from the dead girl, tire tracks remained on the ground. A barely noticeable trail of blood droplets led from this point to the body. Since there were no signs of dragging, the detectives assumed that several people might have been involved in the murder. No dirt was found on Sharon herself, her socks, or her shoes, so she had not crawled on her own. Most likely, she was carried out of a car and left to die in the cold. Not far from the tortured schoolgirl lay a man's shirt. The victim's wrists bore traces of being tied up, apparently. She had been bound with this very garment. The find helped establish that the prime suspect in this brutal crime was quite tall. Near the gatepost, he left another important clue, a clear shoe print. A receipt for the Leo jacket, which the unfortunate girl never had a chance to receive, was also found there. The results of the forensic examination showed that Sharon's death had occurred just a few hours before the body was discovered. Obviously, she'd been held captive from Saturday to Tuesday, subjected to abuse and rape. There were characteristic marks of strangulation on her neck. The girl had choked on her own blood. Forensic experts also recorded that her ribs were literally crushed. It appeared as if the executioner had been kneeling on the victim's chest. In addition, the poor girl had suffered a severe head injury and internal bleeding. Her body was covered with numerous stab wounds, and her jaw was broken on both sides. The nose was also smashed, and the cheek was torn by her own knocked-out tooth. Hundreds of townspeople came to the local Presbyterian church to say goodbye to Sharron Prior. Her mother could barely stand, paralyzed by grief. The only thing she could think about at that moment was for the murderer to be caught and punished as soon as possible. 3 blocks away from Sharon's brutal murder, Canada had already faced a similar crime against a minor. On July 9, 1974, in Stogai, 12-year-old Norma O'Brien was brutally killed. That evening, she had left home intending to play water polo at the pool, but upon arriving, the girl found that it was closed for repairs. Norma turned around and started walking home. She never made it there. That same evening, her parents raised the alarm, reporting their daughter missing. They categorically rejected the possibility of her running away, so the search began immediately. The next day, the schoolgirl's mutilated, half-naked body was found in a field near the pool. There were striking parallels between the murders of Norma and Sharon. Both girls were partially undressed, raped, brutally beaten, and strangled. Moreover, the attack sites were located within a half-hour drive of each other. This led to the idea that the crimes could have been committed by the same maniac. But the investigators had no leads. Already after the massacre of Sharon on June 23, 1975, another girl went missing in Stogai, 14-year-old Debbie Fisher. She was returning home on a red bicycle, but never arrived. The next day, her naked body was found in the woods. Unlike the previous victims, Debbie had not been raped. The cause of death was a blow to the head with a rock. Soon, a 17-year-old boy was arrested for this crime, and he confessed to the deed. Due to his status as a minor, his name and photo were not disclosed. The killer recounted that on that day, around 6:30 in the evening, he was riding home from work on his moped. Suddenly, he spotted Debbie pedaling her bicycle with a bottle of milk in her hand. He scrutinized the girl closely, and a chilling plan took shape in his mind. After greeting her, to which she responded in kind, the guy overtook her and hid his moped in the bushes. Then he sat down on the curb and pretended to be crying. Debbie, seeing this, stopped. The young man asked her to come closer, which she did. At that very moment, the scoundrel grabbed the girl and began groping her. Snatching the bottle from her hands, he hurled it into the field, and then, with all his might, he struck Debbie on the head with a rock. The schoolgirl lost consciousness. Hiding her bicycle in the bushes, the pervert tried to rape the victim but failed. Enraged by the setback, he hit the girl with the rock once more. Debbie died from the injury sustained. The criminal hid the lifeless body in an abandoned car in the woods and fled on his moped. Later, Debbie Fisher's murderer also confessed to killing Norma O'Brien a year earlier. But he insisted that he had nothing to do with Sharron Prior's death. At the time of her demise, the young man had a confirmed alibi, so he was not considered a suspect in this case. He was convicted only for the murders of the 2 other girls. However, given his minor status, the punishment was not too severe a few years behind bars. Now, the former juvenile killer lives and works in Montreal. At the site where Sharron Prior's body was discovered, the police collected a lot of evidence that should have led them to the murderer. The detectives hoped to solve this case within a matter of days, but reality proved far from their expectations. 13 months had passed, and the investigators still did not have a prime suspect against whom they could bring an official charge. Law enforcement officers questioned 38 individuals who had somehow crossed paths with the girl on that fateful evening. 6 of them were detained, as they fit the description. The police were particularly interested in Frank Daly, the manager of the pizzeria where Sharon was going to hang out. But in the end, everyone was released for lack of evidence. The victim's close friends were not overlooked either. All of them had alibis. Some were hanging out at the pizzeria, while others were watching a sports match at home. Gradually, the investigation reached a dead end. No fresh information was coming in, and all leads and clues turned out to be false. It seemed that the investigation had completely stalled everyone, except the murdered girls. Mother had given up. The woman could not come to terms with the loss, and continued to search for at least some details that would shed light on the circumstances of her daughter's death. She understood that on that evening, Sharon could hardly have walked far from the house. Around the same time the girl headed for the pizzeria, One of their neighbors was supposed to be returning from work. For years, he had been walking the same route every day. That ill-fated day was no exception, but the man claimed that he had not seen the girl on the trail. Considering that Sharon did not make it to Marina, she must have been intercepted almost immediately after parting with her friend. The perpetrator had a very narrow time window, but he managed to fit into it perfectly to abduct the schoolgirl without being seen by anyone. The investigators never managed to find a witness to the attack. It was as if it were the perfect crime. The grief-stricken mother was convinced that it was worth taking a closer look at all the residents of their street. One of them might have noticed a suspicious stranger, or recognized him if the attacker himself lived nearby. The detectives were inclined to believe that the killer and rapist was a fairly young guy who most likely still lived with his parents. In their opinion, he had certain mental deviations, perverted fantasies, or something similar that provoked rage and hatred towards women in him. The police suspected that this attack was not his first, and if the maniac was not stopped soon, it might not be the last. The investigators were also sure that several people were involved in the abduction and abuse of poor Sharon. The investigators considered the possibility that the elusive knife-wielding attacker who had assaulted another girl named Cheryl around the same time might have been involved in the crime. Back then, he was thwarted by passers-by, so the perpetrator was forced to flee. Thanks to witnesses, a verbal portrait of this man was compiled, but despite all the efforts of the police, he still could not be found. The likelihood that two maniac kidnappers would be operating simultaneously in one of the city's quietest neighborhoods was extremely low. Therefore, the detectives assumed that the attack on Cheryl and Sharon's murder were committed by the same person. The criminal's behavior indicated that he was well-oriented in the area. He managed to move about unnoticed, leaving no traces and arousing no suspicion among local residents. The investigators agreed with the victim's mother most likely. The killer lived somewhere nearby. His nature was defined as sadistic. People with such perversions usually act according to a certain pattern. At first, they present themselves as charming and sweet, trying to attract gullible victims. Having lured them into their nets, the sadists become increasingly cruel and demanding with each step. It all starts with control, then comes the turn of humiliation and outright abuse. It is according to this scenario that their love affairs with women often develop. But eventually, even this is not enough for the pervert. He turns into a predator who goes out to hunt for new victims. Given this, the police considered it necessary to carefully check all residents of the neighborhood who had convictions for harassment and domestic violence. But first and foremost, the investigators sought to track down the mysterious knife-wielding attacker who had targeted Cheryl. He fit the killer's profile: perfectly low communication skills, since he preferred to communicate with the help of a cold weapon, lack of success in life, and low intelligence. This personality type literally left its imprint on Sharon's mutilated body. Judging by the severity of the beatings, he was accustomed to getting his way not by persuasion or cunning, but by brute force. Obviously, the maniac could not restrain himself, easily flaring up with anger and instantly resorting to violence. The most terrifying realization was that the police were probably dealing with a serial killer who needed to be stopped as soon as possible. At the moment, the murderer was one step ahead of his pursuers. The law enforcement officers were making every effort to track him down. But at that time, many modern technologies that greatly facilitate the work of investigators did not yet exist: DNA analysis, surveillance cameras, tracking phones by geolocation, and so on. The detectives' hands were tied. They were acting too slowly and unprofessionally. The killer took advantage of this to strike again. 6 years after the discovery of Sharon's mutilated body, a 12-year-old schoolgirl named Tammy Lakey became the sadist's victim. It is quite possible that the inhuman decided to switch to defenseless little girls, confident in his impunity after the massacre of 16-year-old Sharon. The examination of Tammy's remains was carried out by the same experts who had investigated the murder of the maniac's first victim. They immediately noticed the striking similarity in the criminal's modus operandi, which became additional evidence in favor of the serial killer theory. On March 20th, 1981, Tammy Lakey was visiting her grandmother. Like the previous victim, the girl disappeared a few blocks from the house where she was staying. The elderly woman was unwell and asked her granddaughter to go to the store, but she never returned. The only find on the girl's way to the store was her glasses, which were lying on the sidewalk. They were noticed by the schoolgirl's mother when she was returning home. The frightened woman immediately reported her daughter's disappearance to the police. Soon, a witness was found who had seen a man in a beige raincoat jump out of a small red car and forcibly push a screaming girl into the vehicle. That same evening, a barely alive Tammy was discovered out in the open. A man called the police station and told them about the terrible find. The poor girl was lying on the ground naked, covered only with her own clothes. Medics desperately fought for the child's life, but the injuries were incompatible with life. The girl had been strangled. Although there were no signs of rape on her body, traces of male semen were found on her belongings. As in the previous case, the attacker acted remarkably sloppily, leaving behind a lot of evidence. But none of it brought the investigation closer to solving these horrific crimes. Despite the persistent efforts of the detectives, the investigation reached a dead end. At this time, similar attacks on young girls and little girls were also taking place in neighboring regions of Canada. In particular, in 1978, the body of 17-year-old Lisa Blais was found dead in Montreal, just a few meters from her own home. Early in the morning, she was returning from a disco club when someone hit her hard on the head, raped, and killed her. The perpetrators of this crime were never found. There were so many similar cases that the police were simply lost in speculation as to whether all these cases were connected. In 2000, Sharon's mother turned to the police once again. The woman insisted on reanalyzing all the materials in her daughter's case. In the quarter century that had passed since then, science and technology had made a huge leap forward. Forensic scientists had at their disposal new, more effective, and accurate methods, particularly DNA analysis. But the answer that the grief-stricken mother received by mail a week later struck her to the very heart. It turned out that most of the physical evidence collected in the year of Sharon's death had mysteriously disappeared back in 1995. Among the few surviving items were only the girl's clothing and that of the alleged suspect. Forensic experts carefully examined the man's shirt found at the crime scene. They managed to isolate a DNA sample that did not belong to the victim herself. However, even after cross-referencing with the genetic profile database, no match could be found. The obtained biological material was carefully preserved for future comparison with samples from potential suspects. Later, this find became the key to solving the chilling case. In June 2004, the police received information about a garage where the killer might have held Sharon captive. The detectives immediately went to the site, but despite a thorough search, they could not find a single piece of physical evidence that would tie the premises to the crime. Law enforcement officers seized 3 DNA samples, but none of them matched either the genetic material of the deceased schoolgirl or the biological traces on her clothing. In the end, this lead was deemed unpromising. The next unexpected turn in this high-profile case occurred in 2012. An unknown benefactor publicly announced a substantial monetary reward as much as $10,000 for any information that would help track down the brutal murderer who had taken the lives of 2 young girls. This event suggested that the investigation had made progress, and the police had some new data at their disposal. For the convenience of all concerned citizens who would like to share their guesses and speculations with law enforcement, a special telephone hotline was opened. Although the investigation continued, as dozens of times before, no breakthrough was achieved. The investigators returned once again to the unsolved episode with the attack on Sharon, hoping to finally establish the identity of the perpetrator. The girl who had chased away the knife-wielding attacker and managed to get a good look at his face agreed to undergo a hypnosis session. In an altered state of consciousness, she was shown photographs of various men, including the infamous serial killer William Patrick Fife. It was him that the witness identified as bearing a strong resemblance to that man. Patrick turned out to be a Canadian maniac whose guilt in the deaths of 5 women in Montreal was proven in court. Although he himself claimed that he had at least 9 victims, the rest of the bodies could not be found. The detectives had long suspected that Fife might be involved in the murders of young girls and had tried in every way to find a connection between him and these chilling crimes. However, the experienced murderer persistently denied his guilt, claiming that he had first taken someone's life no earlier than 1979. Recall that Sharon was brutally killed back in 1975. The charges against Patrick in this case remained mere assumptions. Later, law enforcement officers tried to link the deaths of the schoolgirls with other dangerous Canadian criminals. Suspicion fell on Mike French, a member of the notorious Montreal motorcycle club, the Satans. In 1975, when the bloody massacre of Sharon took place, Mike lived in the same area, and 2 years later, he moved to another city with his parents. French acquaintances characterized him as an extremely aggressive and cruel person, quite capable of killing a child. There were even several witnesses who allegedly heard Mike boasting about his involvement in Sharon's brutal murder. But here, too, fortune turned its back on the law enforcers. In November 1982, during a bloody showdown between rival gangs, French was shot dead. He took all the secrets about his possible involvement in the attacks on the girls to his grave. By the way, the police failed to solve his own death as well. But all these versions remained nothing more than theoretical speculations, which had no solid evidence to support them. The inconsolable Prior family was extremely disappointed with the unprofessionalism of the investigators, who were unable to establish the identity of the real killer. The relatives of the deceased girl swore to seek just punishment for the scoundrel who had abused their child until their last breath. Sharon's mother viewed this grueling fight not only as a matter of honor for her family, but also as a moral obligation to all parents whose children were ruined by perverts and sadists. In 2019, the disconsolate woman took part in the filming of a TV show, along with 9 other families devastated by similar tragedies. They publicly accused law enforcement of incompetence and negligence. Police representatives refused to be present in the studio during the interview. The long-awaited breakthrough in this high-profile case did not occur until June 2022. Thanks to the latest advances in genetic genealogy, experts managed to find a DNA profile in the database that matched the sample taken from the man's shirt at the scene of Sharon's murder. The most likely owner of the genetic material turned out to be Franklin Romine, who had died under mysterious circumstances back in 1982. His remains had to be exhumed to carry out all the necessary analyses. On May 23, 2023, the connection between the biological traces found at the crime scene and the DNA of the late Franklin was officially confirmed. Romine's appearance fully matched the characteristics of the suspect provided by witnesses. The man lived in the area where the abduction took place. His car perfectly matched the tire tracks found near the unfortunate Sharon's body. Franklin had a dark criminal past. In particular, he had already been convicted of assault and rape. All these facts finally allowed the dots to be connected in this chilling story. There was no one to put in the dock, of course, but at least the investigators were able to officially close the case and inform the victim's relatives who had committed this heinous crime. The murder of the 16-year-old schoolgirl was solved thanks to modern DNA analysis techniques and the persistence of her loved ones, who had tirelessly sought the truth for nearly half a century. This is where our today's episode comes to an end. I invite you to share your impressions of this extraordinary story in the comments. Thank you for your attention, take care of yourself, and see you next time on our channel.